Jewellery is a particularly tricky one to make look good because the whole idea with it is that you want to show the sparkle, you want to show the shape, you want to show the texture, you want to show the quality, and that can be quite hard to do. If it's matte finish jewellery, so anyone who makes anything that's kind of like brushed, then you've made your life a lot easier for yourself. If it's really shiny, it's a lot trickier. Generally, with both of these, a really good idea to minimize reflections is to get yourself some kind of light tint. Now, that can be something, you can buy light tints online. They are not expensive at all. It's just something that's made of like a see-through white fabric that you can put your piece in and you can photograph it. You can put a little backdrop in, you can photograph it in there, cuts out reflections. You just poke the camera in through a hole in the front. You can build one of these using white cardboard. You do not need to spend money on it. I've made ones before myself where I've literally just had a little infinity curve of white paper and then just put a box of white card around it. It works brilliantly. A white sheet draped over it will work as well. So there's lots of ways you can do this with things that you have in your house already. But what you want to look out for is missing those reflections. With both matte and shiny finished jewellery. So matte finished jewellery is a little bit easier because it is matte, so the reflections won't be as clear. But you want to show a little bit of the texture. With shiny finished jewellery, you want to show the shine and the reflection. That's where those cards that I was showing you guys on my face are going to come in really handy. So your white card to get your highlights in and your dark card to cut out your shadows. Putting those wherever you need to and moving them to see. So this little guy is a fish. I had to kind of move my cards around the edges, and you will see as you look at the piece where those shadows and those highlights go will change. You get it to where you're happy with it, and that's you. Darker backgrounds tend to be easier for showing lighter colored pieces. Lighter backgrounds tend to be a little bit sort of better for the darker colors. If you want it completely isolated as well, you can also do things like even putting a bit of white paper in a bright window and taping a chain to it so things hang down so it's overexposed behind. There's a lot you can do with just natural light that will work really well. Don't be afraid to use, actually really randomly for lots of you guys, dental wax is wonderful for positioning things if they fall over, because you can mold it and you can squish it, you can stick it on the back and it keeps things in place, but it cleans off really easily. So dental wax that you can buy in Boots for like when you have braces, it's basically for covering your braces, is like an absolute key tool for photographers. I use it all the time. If you're photoing anything that is going to be held or worn on hands, this is one, right? So you can see my nails right here. These are the hands of a working woman. They are not pretty and they're not going to sell your product. So if you wanted to photograph rings or jewelry, you need to get someone who has nice hands, and it's got to look good. Hold them in poses that look soft, so no claws, like kind of things even when your hands sort of folded around a little bit, hands kind of just lying loose, just getting that nice soft depth of field, nice things like that. It's all about the kind of background here. So looking out for wee things like that are good. Also rings and things like that, set them on something a little bit reflective. See if you can get a little bit of like a black shiny tile or perspex or something like that. Even the black screen of a laptop when the laptop's turned off, or the white screen of a laptop when you've got a white page, will give you that artificial kind of reflective background that looks really nice and gives you just a little bit of a reflection in the product underneath. So little tricks like that can work really, really well. And again, it's all stuff you're going to have in the house. Big flat pieces. So this was a huge piece that I had to photograph in Queens. Hilariously, not only was it enormous, I think it was 20 or 30 feet wide, but it also had 2 lights hung in front of it, so you couldn't get a proper photo of it. So I had to go along on a ladder and photograph it in sections and then piece those sections together. There are going to be big pieces where you might need to do that, but for flat pieces like this, so one of you guys was actually asking about painting and you have the lights. So yeah, if you've got 2 lights, that's great because you can shine them from either side at a little bit of an angle. So generally light slightly above and slightly to one side works well because it gives enough shadow to pick up detail and texture, but not a strong enough glare to give you a highlight or a burnout point. You want to go low ISO again, and you want to make sure you have no reflections. So what I find if I'm photographing, say, a painting that's hanging on a wall or something that is behind glass, so for both of these, you need to create a gigantic version of a tent, that light tent that I talked about for the jewellery. So flat pieces behind glass, flat paintings, things like that, anything that will reflect, you need something bigger than the piece behind you or directly behind the camera to stop those reflections. What I find tends to work best is either a plain black, plain grey, or plain white sheet. Something that black tends to work well because most cameras and tripods tend to be black, so the camera tends to be disguised in it. And then it's a case of either using a remote to trigger the camera or hitting it on the timer and getting out of the way, letting that drop back down. So this was just shot with literally this one here. It's a small piece, so a lot easier to do. 2 pieces of black fabric in a V shape. Tripod in the middle of the V so I could stick my hand in and take the photo and then pull my hand back out. It does cut your light down drastically, so you do need to use slower shutter speeds, but it will cut out those reflections. If anything is behind glass, that's kind of the only way to shoot it straight on. Otherwise, you're always going to get reflections. The other option is to shoot it at a little bit of an angle, and then you can correct that perspective afterwards, or shoot it in a really dull room, so you hopefully don't get too much reflection. And what you can do then is you try to get it so the reflections are on the mount or any plane areas, and then you can Photoshop those out. So pieces behind glass are generally a little bit of a nightmare. If you can shoot them before they're in the glass, then it's going to make your life a lot easier, but obviously that's not always going to be the case. So then you're looking at getting those reflections. If it's a very, very, very dark room, the white sheet will work well. Or if you're in a gallery as well, if you've got a white wall directly opposite the piece, that will work quite well too. Another way to do it is to get your camera back a little bit further and zoom in a little bit so that the reflection of the camera is minimal and really, really small. And that means that you won't have as much of a reflection to worry about too. Trying to get yourself out of the shot is a big part of it as well. So if you have a Nikon camera, you can generally fire it from your phone using SnapBridge or NPU, Nikon Professional User mobile app. Canon cameras have one too that I do not know the name of. And you can use timers as well. So there are ways to do it that you can set your timer up in your settings on your smartphone. Same rules apply to the smartphone. You're still going to need that tent or that cloak around it just to cut out all those reflections and just to control those. So it can be tricky to do. I generally tend to do them in front of it, not above it, because you want a little bit of light bouncing back in, and it gives you this nice little shadow of the frame as well. It makes it look more three-dimensional. So you still want a little bit of light in there. If you're photographing something really, really shiny the whole way around as well, that tint effect works as well, and you can put in the strips again of white and black paper to add more reflections. One thing that's really important for these is obviously that card as well, to get the white balance, and you don't want to go too wide. See if a piece is big, do not be tempted to do the easy way and go really wide on either the smartphones or the cameras, because really wide angle lenses warp the edges of your picture and you will get a little bit of a distortion. So if I look at this piece, for instance, there is one slight flaw here. This bit, I just couldn't balance the light out properly, but the girl was happy enough with it, so it was grand. The rest all stitched together. There's like 4 different photos in here. It all stitched together really well, bar this one bit, just because of the way the light was reflecting. The piece was so big I couldn't tent off the entire room. It involved me standing up on a ladder as well. There was no way to do it properly. So it was a case of just kind of stitching it together. But it's all that kind of playing about with light. If you've got lights and you've got a tripod and you've got a place in your house that works particularly well, what can be a really good idea is, if you have the luxury of it, is to leave it set up. Or if you don't, take a photo of the setup that you had and note the settings that you had. And then, because you're going to be shooting with pretty much like those artificial, those constant lights going, and you've got the tint, your settings shouldn't change a lot. So once you get it figured out once or twice perfect, you should be able to then go in and do that numerous times, and it should work really well. For flat pieces as well, you will find that it's generally not a good idea to shoot them from directly above, because quite often we're lit from above, so you will get a shadow of you. So if you are shooting them from directly above, get your camera really straight, really flat, and make sure that you're not casting any shadows. So a nice soft light, again, a tent behind you, things like that will work really well. Anybody who does paintings and print now are like, oh, they're going to have way more work to do. If you're doing glass items, then glass is see-through, so your background is vital, and you need a little bit of backlighting to really give the impression of the 3 dimensions and the texture and the feel. So don't be afraid to go a little bit more editorial in these, or you can also use dark backgrounds behind lighter pieces, just to give you a little bit of that kind of detail coming through. Another good idea is a little bit of backlighting, like I say. So it could be a window, it could be a light bouncing off a white piece of card, something that bounces back through it especially if it's coloured glass, will make it stand out really, really well. That will work for pieces of jewellery too, where they have gemstones. If you've got that light bouncing in from behind, it should show through the facets of the stone and look really nice. I tried to cover as many of these as I could possibly think of. Ceramics and sculpture. You guys, it's all about showing the detail and the shape. So you want to show the finish, the colour and the shape. So you're looking at probably a little bit of side lighting is going to be your best bet. The joy of ceramics is that the reflections don't tend to be as distracting and they don't tend to look as bad, especially if they're a matte or a satin finish. So you'll get away with a little bit more. You won't have to tint things off. It's going to be a case of just using a little bit of zoom if you want to get that softness in the background, moving things around to show the detail, shooting from above maybe to show things in them, and kind of just using your nice backgrounds to suit it as well. So there, if you're making like mugs and things like that, you've given yourself a slightly easier job to photograph. These can be nice to show in hand, and they work particularly well for editorial shots as well. Food is a whole big thing on its own. That is a massive, massive field. But basically, generally the same kind of things. You're using all those fundamentals of photography. So you're framing, your subtle leading lines. You'll see here like the obsessive in me lined up the lines on the courgette with the lines on the table. It's those little details. But what you're really looking out for is bouncing light back in. Again, using those cards, those bounce cards, and don't have any blemishes. So in food, most of it's going to be your prep. You're going to use natural light's always going to be your best for food. It's the most flattering and it's the best colours. But you want to make sure you've no blemishes at all. The best products you can get, cleaning plates, things like that.